Is Sri Lanka facing starvation?
Starvation's a very vague word. I'd like to say that we are facing an imminent undernutrition catastrophe that needs to be addressed. The thing is, our starting point to this has not been altogether good either. We've come into this crisis already with children and young mothers, for example, who are undernourished, and things are only getting worse.
So how far or how long before this nutrition crisis really rears its head?
It's here.
It's here.
It's here already, because we came into this already in a state of like undernourishment for a lot of our population. We've had about 15% of Sri Lankan under 5-year-old children already undernourished coming into this, with wasting and stunting and anemia and so on. And about a third of mothers of these children also undernourished, which causes problems for their nourishment. So we've got a serious problem on our hands, which I think we've got to like treat as a national emergency, rather like we did in the response to the tsunami, and take this very seriously indeed.
What's the source of this information? I think really what I'm asking you is, how credible is this?
So this is not my information. The information basically comes from a lot of sources. There's monitoring going on, for example, through the Medical Research Institute, the Community Health and Public Health divisions of the Ministry of Health, UNICEF, the World Food Programme, the World Bank does its surveys, the WHO does its surveys, and there is a really good network in Sri Lanka of community health that feeds up into the ministry, from midwives, from MOH officers, from immunization, from school data and so on. So I think we've got a fairly good picture from lots of independent sources that this dam is about to burst in Sri Lanka, especially because we all know it's not a secret, and you don't need surveys to know that the cost of living is now impossible. So we are facing an imminent crisis with our children, and the reason this matters is because a lot of the nutrition problem for small children for the first 1,000 days, from gestation to the second birthday, is crucial and has long-lasting effects on the life of the child, whether it's the likelihood of the child getting diabetes or high blood pressure or heart disease, or having a deficiency in stature, in height, or in terms of their cognitive skills, in terms of their IQ, to put it bluntly. So this whole bundle of problems comes along with us, and this is the generation, that the 0 to 12s of today are the generation we need at the time that Sri Lanka is going to be hopefully coming out of this crisis, a generation down the road. They're going to be the leaders, the MPs, the workers, the policymakers in our country. And if we don't nurture this generation through this crisis now, we're looking at some very bad times for the country 10 or 15 years from now.
So what you're saying is that these problems will be noticed eventually in some years' time, when these children, these 0 to 12 kind of thing, are when they reach sort of adulthood.
Exactly. So that is part of the problem. So let me give you a couple of examples. If a man born in 1977 is on average 6 centimeters taller than a man born in 1935, in just 40 years, men in Sri Lanka increased by 6 centimeters in height. Women increased in that same period by 8 centimeters. They all got taller. But we still have problems because we're not tall enough, because a lot of us are not having the nutrients that we need. Of course, the better off people in cities always are better nourished, but at the rural level we have major problems. And so the people I'm concerned about is the people living in, especially in areas that have very low economic output. Kilinochchi, Norelia, Monaragala, these districts are traditionally very badly off. And so we need to pay attention to what's going on with those children. I just want to add one quick point about IQ. Sri Lanka's average IQ at the age of 18 is 87, compared with 100 in Western Europe and in the United States, and compared with something between 100 to 107 in Singapore, Taiwan, and South Korea. We have a serious IQ deficit in the country, and this affects us because the children that go into the so-called STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and medicine, are essentially from an IQ of about 120 upwards. So we're not producing very much of them, and we shouldn't become a nation of physical and intellectual midgets as a result of poor nutrition. So this is a serious problem, and that's why I'm trying to draw attention to saying that it should be solved.
And what's the solution, Ron?
So the solution is getting affordable nutrition out to people, and this is something that we need to pay close attention to. It's not as bad as it seems. To get affordable nutrition is in terms of like getting children a balanced diet, getting fruit and vegetable into their diet, making sure that they have eggs, milk, or fish in their diet regularly, and so on. Now, all these things are expensive. Proteins are expensive.
Yes, they are.
But the thing is, we have cheaper alternatives that we need to educate people to accept. The most nutritious sea fish is one that people don't even want to eat. It's a very low value fish.
Which is?
The singular name is Carella, and Carellas are fish about that size. They're common as dirt in markets. They sell for maybe 500 or 600 rupees a kilo.
But they're the most nutritious?
The most nutritious. And
well,
so
that's what my housekeeper will be told to buy.
That's what she should be buying, but you don't need the nutrition because you're an adult.
Oh, really?
We need this given.
So I don't need the eggs either?
No, you don't. Certainly
it's
don't
50
need
rupees.
No, you don't need those. But children do, and that's the priority that we have to set for ourselves. In terms of freshwater fishes, we have another huge opportunity because Sri Lanka's got close to 10,000 inland tanks. We have 260,000 hectares of inland freshwaters, and we farm fish on only 8% of that resource. We need to expand this maybe by 5 or 6 times. So from the 8%, we are harvesting about 70,000 kilos, 70,000 metric tons of freshwater fish annually. We can boost that up to 300,000 without too much effort. Because
I think we can export some.
We don't need to export them. We need them here. We need them for our.
What about dollars?
Yeah, but we're substituting dollars. And the brains of our children and the stature of our children is far more important than dollars. So I don't think we need to look at that aspect of it, but we're substituting for imports in doing that. And also expand our marine fisheries, because this is a limitless resource. Sri Lanka's got a marine economic zone that's several times the size of the country.
But what about milk powder and so on? We haven't got them here.
Yes.
Now.
Yes, we don't, and this is largely our own fault because we've discouraged the dairy industry in Sri Lanka. I know this is a grisly subject to go into, but it's difficult to keep cattle in an environment when you're prohibiting beef, because a cow stops producing at the age of about 18 or 20 years. It's still got 10 years of life left after that. And if you can't use that cow for meat, then it's very expensive to maintain the animal. And also it's not humane to maintain the animal if you don't give it veterinary care and so on, and people don't want to invest the money in an animal that's not
because it's not yielding the profit.
It doesn't have a return. And also, what do you do with all the male cattle? Because on average you'd have 50% males, but even if you do this selective gender selection that we can do now in veterinary science, you still get about 10% of males.
So what do you suppose was the thinking of the government when they banned beef?
I think that the thinking was religion, because we have to accept that Sri Lanka is a Buddhist culture which abhors all kinds of killing. But then if we can't have nourishment for our population if we don't have at least fish. And
so this is all asai baya again?
This is this is a superstition, really, because I personally, as a biologist, I can't see a difference, a cognitive difference between a cow and a fish, to be honest. You get some very clever fish. And so I don't see the distinction in terms of life or suffering or any.
But how can we have a robust tourism economy? Aren't some of these policies really not thought out properly?
Yeah, sure, the policies aren't thought out properly because we would have paid a lot more attention to them. But ethical issues and religious issues are very hard to grapple with for us. I don't see an easy way out of that. But I think we have to recognize that we need milk. Children need milk. And in a modern society, mothers cannot continue breastfeeding after the age of 2. It's really not practical because they have to go to work and get on with a more complex life. So women are no longer just breeding machines like they used to be a century ago. They have their own lives to lead. And so I think milk food, fresh milk, is hugely important. I'm not sad that milk powder has disappeared, because there were a lot of problems with milk powder. But getting fresh milk out from cows into the mouths of children is hugely important, and we're not doing that now because we don't have enough cattle.
But what is the solution? How are we going to get the dollars to bring all these in and take care of our future, our children?
So Sri Lanka's had a chronic nutrition problem for a long time. We did an assessment in 1970 which found that 50% of the children, the under 5s in Sri Lanka, in the country at that time, were anemic. Now the percentage is about 15%. So we've come out of that. In 1975, we did a national nutrition survey which found also that about 60% of estate workers, families for example, were undernourished. In the case of rural people in villages, about 30% were undernourished. But they also did a sample from private schools in Colombo, and there it was about 3%. So this disparity was enormous. But a great thing happened in 1973, which was the establishment of the Triposha program. Now, Triposha was an all-encompassing cereal that was rolled out to children and to pregnant mothers and lactating mothers, and a hugely successful program. I'll just give you one statistic from the Triposha program, which was a comparative study that was done in 5-year-olds over a period of 9 months. So they took two batches of children who had the same everyday nutrition. One batch was given 50 grams of Triposha a day, that's about 10 teaspoons of Triposha a day as a cereal, and the other wasn't. And in 9 months, the Triposha group put on 2 centimeters in height more than the normal group. So this is something that worked. And then, as this crisis of nutrition was unfolding this year, the government shut down the Triposha program, something I just cannot understand.
Why?
I suspect part of the reason was because they couldn't buy the raw materials affordably because of the crisis.
Dollars.
But I wouldn't just say dollars, because just before the Triposha program was closed down, at about the same time actually, we bought 750 jeeps for the police force. So which is more important, jeeps for the police or nutrition
Must have
for
been on
children?
a line of credit from India.
Whatever it's on, for us, it's morally wrong, because the priority of every politician should be the children. Nothing is more important. It's a very difficult problem, you see, because things would have been a lot easier if we didn't go and cause this fertilizer crisis last year.
Yes.
This was an own goal of monumental proportions. Rice production fell in the last Maha harvest by about 55%. Maize production, corn, which is used for animal feed, fell by about 80%. A kilo of maize last year was 90 rupees. This year it's 240 rupees. And this is the principal animal feed. This is why chicken is now so expensive. And it applies to fish food and all kinds of other things. So we've caused ourselves a huge disaster in terms of our food security. On top of that, we've got prices going up. Inflation in some things is now, in the case of maize for example, is 150% more than it was last year. In terms of the food basket in general, the central bank says it's 57% higher, but I suspect most of you know from your wallet that it's actually much more than that. Yes.
So it's a real crisis.
Yes.
What are the international agencies doing?
The response has been fantastic. So the World Food Programme has stepped in and worked with the nutrition agencies in the Ministry of Health to try and get the Triposha program started again. They're trying to get upwards of $100 million in the course of this year out for getting nutrition to children and to women in Sri Lanka. Yes. Australia pledged $50 million just yesterday, if you saw the news. So Australia, Canada, China, the United States. And interestingly, I saw in the mix MasterCard, I know you don't like trade being mentioned here, but next time you've got a choice between Visa and MasterCard, I urge you to think about it. MasterCard stepped in to help Sri Lanka with nutrition through the World Food Programme. So there's been a fantastic response from them and from the Health Ministry officials who've traditionally done a fantastic job. The thing is, for us, this deserves to be said because it's not said often enough. Sri Lanka's public and community health service is absolutely world class. They've, the fact that they beat back malaria in 2015, we became malaria free after centuries of malaria plaguing our people and debilitating our children. They controlled the SARS epidemic absolutely professionally. We basically didn't have a SARS epidemic in Sri Lanka because they got out there well up front and managed it. HIV AIDS in Sri Lanka has been beautifully managed as well by them. Because this is a difficult thing to manage because it's sensitive. But when COVID came along, we put them to a side and gave the job to the army, which I just couldn't understand. So these people are actually very professional at what they do. They've been at this for a long time. They've been highly trained by international agencies. And so I think left to themselves, working with the World Food Programme, UNICEF and so on, they will roll out a really good response to this in terms of nutrition. We just need to get them the place in the national policy limelight to put nutrition front and center of our response to this crisis.
Don't you think that the problem is even further exaggerated by the fact that parents don't have enough money these days?
It shocks me to think that more people in the policy world aren't paying attention to this. The only person I've heard speaking about the nutrition crisis in Parliament, for example, has been Sajid Premadasa, who made a very good speech about 2 weeks ago on this subject. Clearly understands the problem. The thing is that we've put so many people into abject poverty as a result of the agricultural crisis. Remember that 2 million families in Sri Lanka are completely dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods. And when you consider the loss in agricultural output, you can see how much money was taken away from their pockets. We imported 1 million tons of rice in this last year because of the agricultural shortfall. The first time in 15 years that we had a major net shortfall, apart from 2016, which was a Yahapalina government's mess up. But just quickly to add, in this current Yala harvest, according to the UN, out of the normal 500,000 hectares that is farmed for rice, we are down to 125. It has fallen by 75%. That has put hundreds of thousands of farmers out of employment, out of income. And there's no money for them to buy their children any food. We've got a huge tragedy unfolding in Sri Lanka, and we really need to pay attention to this. This is not a problem of petrol queues. Petrol queues is a thin edge of the wedge. We've got a massive problem in rural Sri Lanka that we are just completely ignoring, except for a very few people in politics.
Brown Petty, honestly, so what should this government be doing?
Get the Triposha program started off immediately. If there's a shortage of money, this is a fantastic CSR opportunity for big business to pay for. There can't be a better investment in the future than securing the well-being of the 3 million children under 12 in Sri Lanka at this moment. And this is a huge challenge, but you can work through schools to get the school meals program restarted, because that's gone into disuse as well because of a lack of money. And this used to cost, Triposha used to cost 5 billion rupees a year. It's petty cash. The jeeps we bought in January cost more than 10 billion, sorry. So 2 years worth of Triposha in 750 jeeps.
It was almost criminal when they opened those LCs and then claimed that it was too late because they'd already opened the LCs. It's absolutely criminal.
But that was for luxury cars.
Yeah.
And that was before the Triposha was cancelled. So it just makes it even more ironic. I just don't understand where the priorities come from.
It's obviously, do you think that the politicians are, from your observances, that these politicians and people in authority are underinformed?
Yes. I think we've got a huge intellectual challenge in politicians, because the level of education in politicians is quite low to start with. There's very few politicians whom you hear making an analytical, presentation. I mean, apart from Partali Champika, I can't think of anyone who really comes up with analysis and solutions from the opposition. So it's him and Sajid who are talking about policy all the time. It's from the government, you don't hear anything at all. I agree with you, but my point that it is not political means that this is not a matter on which politicians divide themselves. This is a nutrition for children is something on which everyone would agree. This is not divisive. And so it's an ideal opportunity for politicians from both sides of the aisle to come together to deliver a national policy that successfully delivers a well-nourished generation 20 years from now. And that's all I ask.